Hi, this is Bob Shear, an intrepid reporter for many decades covering international relations and war. And I'm talking to some guy who was on the other side. Usually I was trying to figure out stuff from a kind of contrarian figure. What are these people up to in whatever government I'm writing about? And here I'm talking to one of the top guys in the U.S. government. First, he started with Army intelligence, then he goes to the CIA. For 27 years, he briefs three American presidents, President Nixon, Ford, and Ronald Reagan, or as part of the daily brief for these presidents. And all of that time at CIA, he was the leading analyst for much of that time on the old Soviet Union, on Russia. And now we're looking at this world in which all of these characters and nations and people are moving around, and it seems in some ways like the most one of the most dangerous moments that we have. And I just want to begin, though, by letting Ray brag about his, even though he's an old coot like I am, he's able to effectively use the internet or reach people on the internet because he put out a tweet that made a historic reference. I'm surprised so many people know about it, but was when the U.S. shipped the Liberty many, many years ago, back at the time of the Six Day War in Israel, was strafed and shot up by Israel. So he had a tweet to the, was it the Nimitz captain? I'll let you tell the story, warning them that Israel might attack their ship in reference to the Liberty, and it's 400,000 and counting are going to your tweet. So, Ray, you're kind of an internet star right at the moment. I don't mean to trivialize it's sad, tragic moment, frightening moment we're in, but it does reflect on media and how we get our news. So take it away.
Yes, Bob, you are intrepid, and I want to say that I'm happy to be with you again. I was elated when I saw what this tweet or X that I did late night, I guess 2 nights ago, when I heard that the USS Nimitz, one of our largest aircraft carriers, actually it's sort of due for decommissioning in another half year, that it was being sent from the Pacific to the Middle East to be there to take part in whatever is necessary to take part in during this Israeli attack on Iran and Iran's retaliation. So I said to him, "Oh," I said to myself, if I were the Israelis and I was starting to lose, which by the time the Nimitz gets in the area, they will be losing. The Israelis cannot sustain what they have started. I think if I were Israeli, I would really, really be desperate to get the U.S. in on our behalf, full fledged with offensive weapons. How do they do this? Oh, here's a way. Somehow or other, I attack the USS Nimitz as it gets close to the Middle Eastern waters, and I have it so that I blame it on the Iranians. My God. Now it's hard to sink an aircraft carrier, but you can do a lot of damage to it, and you kill a lot of people. It's quite within Israel's capability to do precisely that, and Israel is a specialist at false flag operations. So McGovern thinks, well, how do I warn the captain? I found his name. I sent a flash message, just like we used to do in warning people in the military sense, a flash message warning the skipper of the USS Nimitz, look, be on the lookout for an attack, not so much from the Iranians. They're not going to attack you. The Israelis might, and it will be a false flag. And remember what they did to the USS Liberty, back in, well, June 8th, 1967. That was an attack. They killed 34 sailors, wounded 174 more. So don't put it past the Israelis. If you get hit, find out who hit you before you buy into the Israeli narrative that it was the Iranians. Now, I thought, well, maybe that won't get to the. I don't know the skipper's email address, so I'll just put it out there. And before you know it, I think the last count there was about 450,000 hits or looks or whatever you call it on X. I think that's important because the whole motivation that Israel has now is to get the U.S. military militarily involved in more than just helping them defend against Iranian missiles. So far, Trump has played it pretty cagey. In my view, he was mousetrapped. He was not forewarned, as he bragged initially that he was, and so I think he's got some scores that he wants to pay for Netanyahu's uh, arbitrary action. Now, everyone would say, "Well, Ray, for God's sake, he bragged about it. He said excellent. He said great operation." Well, yeah, but when did he do that? Thursday night, okay, the attack started. He had his people all together, the military, and said, "Now watch this, Mr. President, because the Iranian air defenses, we've sabotaged them. They don't work anymore. Watch." And shoot, all these Israeli planes get through. We have total domination of the air. And they did for 8 hours. Okay. Now these Iranians, they happen to be pretty good at repairing stuff, so they got it back up after 8 hours. Now, Trump was still under the illusion. Whoa, the Israelis have done this magnificent thing. They're on their way to complete victory, and that's when he said, "Excellent, and I know all about this. Yeah, I know everything." Direct quote. But it wasn't hours before he backpedaled and said, "Well, no, I didn't know about this." And oh my goodness, it doesn't look very good. And now he's waffling back and forth. And he's actually approved of the only hopeful thing, and that is he's approved of Putin's reaction to his Trump's overture 3 weeks ago. Can you help us out on Iran? Because Putin has said, "Yeah, I can. As a matter of fact, I'm happy to be a mediator." And Trump has said in his last talk with Putin, "Okay, please, we have nothing against that. That sounds like a good idea. Why don't you mediate?" So we have a situation here where actually Russia is not in a bad position to mediate because they have decent relations with Netanyahu as well as with the Iranians, and the Chinese are in the thing here, so they want to mediate as well. The major, and this is worth stressing, Russian media today and yesterday have been warning about nuclear catastrophe. Okay, what do they mean? What they mean is this: that if Netanyahu continues to lose the war, okay, if he's in what we call dire straits or in extremis, will he use his nuclear weapons? Now, I've been asked that on air, and what I say is this is a guy who's killed maybe 100,000 Palestinians in genocide. A lot of this has to do with the fact that if his government falls, very likely he and his wife end up in jail. Now, out of personal considerations and considerations to keep his government going, would he do genocide? Yeah, he's doing that. Would he employ nuclear weapons? I mean, my God, I fear that he might. So I'm not only, I think the Russians and the Chinese, the Indians and the Iranians themselves feel that this is a likely thing. So the idea is to tamp this thing down, to get it back on the negotiation track before this happens. And it's odd to think that even the Iranians would realize that it's better to be a little bit holding back so that Netanyahu doesn't do this, because even if it's only a 50-50 chance, for God's sake, nuclear weapons, that would change the whole ball game and would pollute Iran, and those winds go into Russia as well. People are really beginning to realize how serious this is and uh, how Netanyahu might play this card, desperate as he will be in just another week or so.
It's interesting. Jeffrey Sachs, who has been very central to U.S. foreign policy, uh, beginning when he was very active when Gorbachev was in power, and then Yeltsin, and so forth. And he wrote a column for Common Dreams that we reposted at SharePost, where he said Netanyahu has to be constrained. Netanyahu is really a dangerous figure here. And that, after all, Israel was allowed to develop the bomb. And the argument was somehow some people accepted, I guess, in the U.S. government, they're somehow inherently more virtuous. After all, the Jewish people suffered so terribly in World War II. Were not until Israel came along considered to be interested in making war primarily. And there was a sort of fantasy that we could, an Israeli bomb was somehow not as threatening as a bomb made by anyone else. The other point, and that is not the case now, people are really concerned about its being used. But also, you mentioned Russia, and in all of the simple evil, good, so forth, and everything, these lines change. And actually, as you point out, Putin's Russia has good relations with Israel. But even going way back, the first two countries to recognize Israel were Stalin's Russia and the United States. There's some argument about who did it first, you know. So it is a complex situation. What I want to ask you, because and I respect you because you're the first person that told me that things were not going well for the Ukraine and Zelensky in the war with Russia. And I had a lot of skepticism because at that point it looked like the Russians were floundering and their tanks were getting bogged down and it wasn't working. And you stuck to your story, and it's turned out to be very accurate. Trump has confirmed that. He told Zelensky, you're not going to win that and it's not going well. But hearing you now say that Israel is in military trouble seems so counterintuitive to everything we read in the mainstream media that I have to ask myself, is McGovern lost at this time? Because that's the last thing I thought you would say today when we got together for discussion, that the war is not going well for Israel because they control the skies. Trump claims he controls the skies. He's told the Iranians, you have nothing else to do but unconditional surrender, or we're going to wipe you all out and drop our 30,000-pound bomb on you, and so forth. Where do you come off saying that it's not going well for Israel?
Well, let's go back to the Ukraine comparison. Um, Ukraine never had any chance to defeat Russia. You look at the size of Russia, look at the capabilities of Russia, the arms and all that stuff. Ukraine never could do that. As a matter of fact, Obama said that in 2015. He said, look, the worst thing we can do is to give the Ukrainians the idea that they could prevail in a war with Russia. I mean, geography itself showed that. Now, similarly, with respect to Iran and Israel, oh, this is interesting. I hope you people will read my retweet of Tucker Carlson and that fellow Cruz from Texas, Senator Cruz, because Tucker Carlson says, "So you're confident that Israel is going to prevail?" So, um, tell me, Ted, how many people in Iran? And Cruz says, "I don't know." And Carlson says, "You don't know?" "No, I don't know. How many?" 92 million. Wow. So what? 92 million, 50 million, 10, 100 million, says Cruz. And Tucker says, you're going to go to war with a country you don't even know how big the population. What's going on here, Ted? It doesn't matter. But then this is just a 1.5 minute clip of a program that I guess runs tomorrow. But there it is. These people don't know diddly. Okay, 92 million against Israel. I think is 11, 12 million, or maybe 10 million. Okay, and Iran has inexhaustible supplies of hypersonic missiles that cannot be defended against. Okay, they've shown that recently, and they've been keeping the best of them in reserve. Now, Israel can't sustain what they've been doing. The more so since those darn Iranians, those clever chaps, they somehow figured some way to fix those air defense systems, and the Russians are feeding them with more extensive weaponry, and so are the Chinese by air, by special flights into Iran. So what most of the military specialists that I believe are saying, it's just a matter of time before Netanyahu will say, "My God, I don't want to cry uncle here. What I will cry is Uncle Sam. Please, please come and help." And so far, I think Trump is going to be saying, "Look, you mousetrapped me once. I don't like to be mousetrapped again." And then we're going to have then we'll have the false flag attack where U.S. military will be killed by the Iranians, really by the Israelis under a false flag, and Trump will have to face that whether he will intervene with both feet. So it's pretty complicated, but the main concern here, and it's a legitimate concern on the part of all sensible powers, is to prevent Netanyahu from using his nuclear weapons. And there's got to be a way that they can stop him without making him feel like Samson with no hair. Okay. And I think the Russians are trying to work on that. I know they are. They've offered to be mediators. I was surprised that Trump said, "Huh, yeah, that's a good idea. I can nothing about against that." So I see the push for negotiations to succeed when Netanyahu realizes, look, this was really biting off too much. I can't chew it. And whereas we thought the president of the United States would be in on this with both feet, now he's showing cold feet, and we can't survive without that. So what's he going to do? I suggest he'll do first and foremost the false flag.
So, my first reaction is from your lips to God's ear, assuming this rational behavior, but also, and it will not be the first time that you turned out to be right and my skepticism turned out to be wrong. We've had a number of conversations over the years, actually, or follow each other's work, but it's so counter to what we're reading in the media. Iran is supposed to be falling apart. They're obviously evacuating, or people are evacuating, the capital where 10 million people, or Tehran where 10 million people. They looks like very little gets through Israeli defenses. It's the narrative is supposed to be the hapless, underdeveloped country, right? This was shock and awe. Now we were shocked in Iraq to find out that the shock and awe of those first few days did not seal a victory. There was George Bush II seemed to have, wow, just knocked off Saddam Hussein, and now everything's going to be great. They're going to love us and everything. Instead, we get bogged down in this terrible war. And we know that Iran has the capacity. Maybe plenty of people don't like the Ayatollah. I'm not conversant with all the inside feeling of what polls you can trust. But the fact of the matter is, when they were fighting Iraq, and we were on the side of Iraq back in those days before we invaded Iraq, the Iranians put up an incredible fight with their extra resources, their manpower, and so forth. So I want to push you a little bit more on this. Because I think again I'm falling for the conventional wisdom that Israel has this incredible, powerful, advanced military technology, almost all of which came from the United States, and they can use this technology now so effectively to just neuter the other side. And the Iranians are sort of a hapless crowd that can't shoot straight. And yet, you had 27 years in the CIA. You got a lot of friends around who know this stuff cold that I know you chatted up with. So let's push. Tell me more about this, because the reality is no country likes to take casualty. This is why the U.S. ran into trouble with its wars. The American public doesn't want it. The American public will turn against Trump. They seem to have turned against him already somewhat on this. But if you're talking about committing U.S. troops and you're talking about, the kind of bloody mess we had in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, Trump is not going to survive that. And I'd like to know more about how this works because it looks like, what did Israel claim in its first attack? They took out half of the missiles that Iran had
Mhm.
and, right, destroyed
Yeah.
uh, their anti aircraft and so forth. So, if that's all nonsense or half truth, tell me how you read it differently.
Well, Bob, it's like all those reports that the New York Times wrote about how successful the Ukrainians were, and how 2 years ago the head of the CIA told President Biden, Putin has already lost, and his armed forces have been shown to be inefficient for the whole world to see. That was early July 2023. 10 days later, Biden got up in Helsinki and said, not to worry. Putin has already lost. And my national intelligence director tells me uh, that Russia's running out of weaponry and they have no indigenous capability to produce the weapons that they're losing on the front. Now, the New York Times dutifully reported that, the LA Times too. Now we're getting the same repetition from what the Israelis are telling us. What are the Israelis telling us about the Iranian missiles that got right through the Iron Dome and the Patriot missiles and all those other sophisticated systems we gave to Israel? They're telling us nothing. But we know from some bombing damage assessments that they've hit their inner sanctum, Ministry of Defense, their military intelligence headquarters, and some of the airfields. Okay, they've demonstrated that capability months ago. Now it's for real. How many do they have of hypersonic missiles? I don't know, but most people think thousands, and that's why, given the fact that there's no air defense against these, no missile defense, no rocket defense, no defense at all, that the Iranians have the ability to attrit, and hit what they ever want in Israel. And so, it used to be we all believed that the Israeli army was the paragon of efficiency and cleverness. But up against the Iranians, they can't do it. The country is too big, and they can't. And the business about hitting nuclear facilities. Well, here's an example. There's a place called Fordo. Okay, now that establishment, which I think has these centrifuges whirling around, is a half mile inside a mountain and under the mountain. Now, there's no known weapon that can take that out. They might be able to seal the entrance. I don't know. But that facility is bomb proof. Now,
Even against a 30-ton bomb that the
yeah,
U.S.
most people say it won't do it. It might close the entrance. Now, how about a nuclear weapon? Still, there's some doubt as to whether a nuclear weapon could destroy that thing that's dug a half mile under the mountain. So, the propaganda that Israel is putting out that, oh, they've destroyed all these things, well, that's not true. And a matter of fact, even in those early hours, right after the Iranian defenses went up, okay, then there were still many explosions. Those were bombs. Those were secret agents, and they pretended those were missiles. Okay, that's the straits that they resorted to. It's pretty clear. I know who to rely on here. That was my shtick when I was managing intelligence. The reliable military and economic analysts. I knew which ones would tell me the truth. They're telling me the truth now that it's a suicide mission if Trump is persuaded to go in with both feet because uh, Israel is going to lose anyway. It's just it will take a longer time. And when it loses, all bets are off as to whether Netanyahu will use the Samson option and employ his 200 or so nuclear weapons, helter skelter, and bring other people down at the same time.
Well, let me again. We're going to wrap this up soon, but because we'll and see what happens. But I want to push back because it really goes to the question of the supremacy of the Western world, and certainly when it comes to making war. And this notion that somehow our technology, and we ran into some problems when you have to use your own people. The public will not go for that after a certain point. That happened, well, beginning in the Korean War, but certainly happened in Vietnam and it happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. But the idea that the equipment itself is so dazzling, right? The technology of war is so advanced on the part of the United States, and we have now shared that with Israel, and they have a lot of smart people. And then in Iran, we managed to kill what 13, or Israel did, and the United States, so backing it, killed 13 top scientists. Right, very problematic use of assassination to kill scientists, but nonetheless, they did. And they seem to be incredibly successful at this. And the other people fall into a view of the third world, of nations that can't really make stuff and everything. So, what's going on here? Are you challenging all that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's nice to be a contrarian when you think everybody else is just feeding off propaganda. The reality is, reduced to a simplest, why does the United States of America not have a hypersonic weapon? Why don't they have the same capability that the Oreshnik developed by the Russians have? It's a non-nuclear thing, but it goes so fast you can't intercept it. And when it impacts, the kinetic action is almost equivalent to a nuclear weapon without the fallout. Why is it that the U.S. doesn't have
It
that?
goes through the atmosphere, so it's harder to shoot down if you can maneuver it.
I'm
The
sorry.
argument is it's lower level. It can evade, but I mean,
True.
it's not only its speed, but it can be evasive, and that's the issue. A couple of the articles that I read said, well, they've got the fast ones. We see that. I forget what they're called, but they've got the fast ones, but they can't. It's not clear whether they can maneuver it, and if they can maneuver it, then they still can be shot down. If they can maneuver it, then
Yeah.
you got a real problem. And it looks like the Russian one that took out a key target in the Ukraine was maneuverable and it was unstoppable. U.S.
Yeah.
suggesting that Iran has that now?
Yeah, if you look at the videos, Bob, this is incredible. You have videos from like 2 hours ago, and you have the Oreshnik type missile coming down. That doesn't come down like this; it comes down boom like that. But as it halfway, here comes an Israeli interceptor, and the thing goes like that, boom. Okay, so all I'm saying is that the Iranians have been thought to be like Egyptians or Syrians, the old joke, the new Syrian tank, it's got one gear for forward and four gears for reverse in case of an attack from the rear or something like that. It used to be very common to disparage anyone in comparison with the Israelis. That ain't the case anymore. The other thing is quantity. Quantity itself is a quality, as the Russians used to say. And the Iranians have quantity. We've had to take some of those Patriot missiles that we're going to give to Zelensky. And so, sorry about that. We're going to give them to Netanyahu. And how long are they going to last? Maybe one more week. So uh, what you're getting in the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal is what the Israelis are telling us. And the Israelis are deliberately keeping away. It's forbidden to take iPhone pictures of these missiles as they come in. And despite that, of course, we're getting some. So it's a new it's a new ball game. And as soon as it becomes clear that the Israelis are taking serious losses, then comes the question about, can we get both sides to stop, for God's sake? before Netanyahu resorts to his nuclear weapons. That's the problem. If he could do genocide, he could do nuclear weapons. And if it's just to keep himself and his wife out of jail, oh my God, that's despicable, but he's doing it. And we have to see if he's going to do that on the nuclear issue as well.
Well, we're going to see. This is all going to emerge pretty quickly. Just one little historic note. I mean, a connection with history. I happened to be in Egypt and Israel in that area at the end after the Six Day War, and uh, and I was in, I landed in the Cairo airport. I could see all of the Egyptian planes uh, because the Israeli intelligence had been so good, or U.S. intelligence, that they knew which were the dummy planes and which were the real planes, and the Egyptian army, which was rather large and thought to be a real threat, was nothing. They actually hadn't attacked Israel. Talk about false flag. This was a preemptive war. Israel claimed they were going to be attacked, and that's how they ended up having, Gaza and the West Bank. But I remember that certainly the Egyptian army had been hobbled by that first attack. Their air force had been wiped out. And this looked like, and I think in the minds of some Israelis, this would be a repeat. We see that there really was no major Iranian force. And there's a lot of talk about how unhappy the Iranian population is, and that they'll be the same with Saddam Hussein, of course. They'll be cheering in the streets, but that didn't last too long. And so I think I'd like to end on that, just saying, does this represent uh, a new sharing or presence of counterpower wherever Iran managed to get those weapons or get the technology? Are we seeing something different here? And even in the case of the recent fighting between India and Pakistan, suddenly Pakistan had a higher level of technology than they had been thought to have. They were able to, in a sense, defeat the Indians or certainly hold them back. I'll give you the last word on this. Are we seeing indeed a shifting to a multi-power world in which even what was thought to be a less developed country could present itself in a fearsome way?
Yes, Bob. Witness Ted Cruz. He didn't know a thing about Iran. He probably thought it was a kind of a third world country that didn't amount to much. The Iranians are incredibly efficient. They're bright as can be, and these scientists and these generals can easily be replaced by their deputies. Okay. Now, I just want to reemphasize what you said about the Six-Day War. That was a deception. That was done without U.S. foreknowledge. Let's face it, the Israelis are famous for preferring to not to ask for permission, but to ask for forgiveness after they've won the war. Okay, Menachem Begin, a former prime minister of Israel, told an audience in Washington several years after that that, look, let's be honest. These are a direct quote. Let's be honest. Nasser's troops there in Israel, they were in Egypt near the Sinai. They were no threat to us. We decided to attack them. Okay, and look, we prevailed. So let's be honest. The prime
And just to remind people listening to this, that's how they got Gaza and the West Bank,
That's
and,
exactly.
and which and the irony, of course, the Palestinians didn't have an army, and in Gaza was they had Egypt was control of Gaza, Jordan was control of the West Bank, and Israel made peace after with the two countries, and the people who lost everything were the Palestinians. It's
Yeah.
another irony of that. Yes.
And in November of 1967, the UN unanimously passed a resolution saying Israel had to give up the occupied territories. 1967, the US voted with the majority, it was unanimous. So that's the background of all this. The other thing I want to say is that my profession of intelligence, um, I had been thinking that the CIA should be abolished. Okay. And for years now, I've been saying, no, Ray, now don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The bathwater can be given to the Pentagon. Those are the guys that overthrow governments, okay? The assessments, wow, look what they're doing on Iran. They are being courageous. There's great pressure on them to say, oh no, Iran's building a nuclear weapon. And every year since 2007, they have repeated the evidence does not support that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. It's not. It's unanimous and it's expressed with high confidence. They did that as recently as March. Now, what has Trump done? For once, a member of the press reminded Trump about that on the aircraft, and he said, "I don't care what she says." She, being the National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard, I don't care what she says. I think that the Iranians are close to getting a nuclear weapon. Okay, well they're not. And the former head of the CIA said just a couple months ago before he left office, look, not only are they not working on a nuclear weapon, but if they even started, we have the capability of finding out really quickly that they have started and then it will take some time. So this is a lie, okay? And when Tulsi Gabbard says, well, I'm on the same page with the president, that too is a lie. We have some of us call for Tulsi Gabbard to sacrifice what's left of her honor and quit and tell the whole world that this is a lie. It's a consequential lie if Trump thinks that he can persuade people that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. That is really big. And the kind of the corollary of all this is that now there's no baby left in that damn bathwater. I mean, I was taking pride in the fact that number one, in 2007, my colleagues prevented a war by telling Bush, Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice, look, all of our intelligence agencies agree unanimously with great confidence that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon and stopped at the end of 2003. Now, that was then. That kept being repeated. I said, "My God, there's some reason to keep this baby." I mean, they prevented a war. Bush and Cheney wanted to go after Iran on their last year in office, 2008, because the Israelis wanted them to. Bush went to Tel Aviv. He said, "I'm sorry about that national intelligence estimate. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's right." But he wrote in his book, how could I authorize a strike, a military strike against the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. Okay. So we prevented a war in 2007. The honest people working on this issue kept reiterating the truth. And now Trump has said, I don't care what they say. I think they're close to a nuclear. So he's listening to his neocon people. We'll see. I think the Russians will be stronger in dissuading Trump from entering this thing with both feet. But yeah, the disgrace to the intelligence process is lasting. I don't know how you fix it now because there's no baby that should be kept out of the bathwater or the drain.
Okay, so my final comment, I still find this, despite your, I don't know, your reassuring, your complex view, I think is one of the most frightening moments in certainly modern history because, you know, I don't know what our president is thinking. I don't know who he's listening to. And this is one of those situations where it doesn't matter because most of the Congress goes along with this very simplistic view of Iran and what the issues are and so forth. And I don't see much opposition. But let's see if the facts get in the way of the push to war. Okay, thanks, Ray McGovern, and another session of the Bob and Ray show. I want to thank Joshua Shear, our executive producer, putting these things together. Diego Ramos, the managing editor of SharePost, for helping get it going with the intro and everything. Max Jones for doing the TV. The JKW Foundation providing some support for this, as well as Integrity Media based in Chicago. See you next time with another edition of the Ray and Bob Show, or is it the Bob and Ray Show? I don't know. No room here. Okay, take care.
Thanks, Bob.